to the world of chiropractic, where we take one epic journey around the world as we explore the 7 regions of the World Federation of Chiropractic. My name is Dr. Rebecca Wilkes, and I invite you to travel with me as we go on this exciting adventure around the globe. Northwestern Health Sciences University will be celebrating their 80-year anniversary this October, and I am pleased to welcome the 8th president and first female president of NWHSU, Dr. Deb Bushway. Welcome, Dr. Bushway.
I'm excited to be here.
You described NWHSU as uniquely positioned to shape the role of modern healthcare. Can you expound on this?
Absolutely. The reason I say that is, as we know, at least in our country, our healthcare system, as we've seen in this last year for sure, is struggling in many, many ways, right? And what I have often said, and we believe firmly, is that healthcare system cannot be fully repaired, fully functional without the professions we train. I don't claim that we're the whole answer to the problem, but without us, the solution is not robust, is not sustainable, can't move forward. And I believe that because of some of the things we're going to talk, I think, a little bit more about, which is this emphasis on the whole person, this emphasis in integrative care, this emphasis in care that I think is getting labeled as conservative care, meaning is there anything we can do that short of surgery and pharmaceutical interventions that can help you get back to your full health? And I believe our professions can do that in ways that some of the other professions are more limited.
Right. It kind of embodies a term that NWHSU, I wouldn't say coined, but they have tried to embody most recently, and that is called Salutogenesis. Can you expound on that particular term?
Absolutely. So what you're referring to is that we have, again, recently published one of our white papers that really is emphasizing salutogenesis as an approach to healthcare, meaning that there is a whole wrap around for every single patient, and it has to do with embracing lifestyle. How do you eat? How do you sleep? Socioeconomic factors. So we're taking very seriously the healthcare disparities that exist along racial and economic lines. We have another paper that we published around racial healthcare disparities in integrative care. There's not a lot of evidence there yet, but we gathered it. So just all the evidence about the impact of socioeconomic factors, right? The impacts of things that you can control, like your sleeping and your eating, the impact of your psychological and spiritual well-being, all of these things wrapping around the physical body and impacting them. We know we have really decades, maybe centuries, if you look at different kinds of evidence that the mind-body impact is both directions, right? And we believe that we have to be impacting and supporting people's health in all of these ways so that individuals can feel agency around their own health and support themselves, but also seek out the professionals that can support that attitude, that mindset, that worldview for them. So one of the other pieces that we're doing that I think really supports this person-centered effort across the board is really taking our own sort of spin on the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we see going on everywhere, corporately in higher ed, everywhere in healthcare. And we've got a campaign that we've called Belong. So the idea with Belong is that we want everyone to feel that they feel safe, that they can learn, and that they can thrive on our campus. And we mean everyone within the confines of some limits, which is we don't tolerate any disrespect or any aggressiveness or violence, right? But what we're trying to do is build an environment in which we all can hear stuff with which we might disagree. Because we believe that that's the bridge forward. That I hear stuff that I disagree with and I'm challenged by. But it makes us richer and stronger if we can begin to listen understand, and then have the conversation with one another. So it cuts across all sorts of diversity of thought, of course, racial, ethnic identity, gender, and GLBTQ kinds of issues, all sorts of issues, ability, disability. But that's really one of our big efforts right now. We've done a lot of work in the leadership level. We're currently going through a training. We're offering trainings for the faculty to change the curriculum. We believe it's essential for an institution like ours, serving patients and students, to really grapple with that.
It's interesting how we can get so just anchored down in our own beliefs and thought processes without actually having a real reason for that. And unless if we can open our minds to other perspectives, I mean, there's really no logical rationale to be that anchored in something.
Right. Anchored in sort of dismissive and judgy, like, that doesn't serve us. And so it's been a very fascinating journey for me, because I have strong opinions, as I always say. I have more opinions than I should, but it goes back to that training. So curiosity said, help me understand why you think that, right? And then I get it.
Right. And of course, anyone in a position that you're in probably wouldn't be in that position without having strong opinions.
Oh, thank you. That's good.
For those of you who are watching and want to look into the WFC principles, they basically expound a little bit more on what the WFC stands for. And with the WFC principle number 4, they discuss basically the exact same thing. It's palpable, the passion that you have about healthcare, not medicine, but healthcare, right?
Yes.
And caring for the health. And you have stated that you are passionate about healthcare and also higher education, with over 20 years of experience within higher education. And you've recently presented evidence to the U.S. Senate Committee on Education and have a keen interest in something called competency-based education. Can you expound on this?
Yeah. So the risk here is that I'll expound a little longer than you might want on competency-based education, but the competency-based education is really based on the idea that what we want out of people as they get educated is for them to demonstrate competency. In the US, and in many other countries, a lot of the educational system is based on time. So based on an amount of time that you spend in class, right? And that is a proxy for learning. That is what we use to indicate that you've learned. That's actually what the credit hour is, for example. And one of the biggest barriers, in my opinion, to truly becoming competency-based is licensing boards who have hours requirements, right? They do have an exam that you're supposed to be able to demonstrate competency in, but they also have this hours requirement. In a competency-based model, you would be agnostic as to the source of learning. You would offer people opportunities to learn and to demonstrate their competency, and then people can sort of move along through the course of education as they demonstrate these competencies. The assessments clearly have to be very robust, but it's much less based in a time model, an hours model, and much more personalized to the individual. Because what you know, what I know, is that there may be a class that we both take, and that class may be stuff you have down pat, and you just are sitting in class thinking, oh my goodness, can I get to something that I don't already know? And I may be in that class thinking, I do not get this. I need more time. But turns out we both sit in that class for 12 weeks. At the end, you feel you've wasted many hours. And at the end, I may fail because it may be that I need more time to get that. So in our system, it's not about the learning, it's about time. And what competency-based education tries to do is flip that on its ear, hold a standard of learning that ought to occur, and let you do it as quickly or as slowly as you need to.
So you just gave an example of the 12, having 12 weeks, having 2 students, one being on one end, the other being on the other end. Practically speaking, how would you implement this competency portion over the time aspect?
Yep. So usually what you do is you allow, so it depends, there's many, many ways. So I'm going to oversimplify, of course. But let's just let's just imagine a program that is freed from the time aspect, which it can be even in the US in something called direct assessment programs. So let's just imagine that you come to the student and you are transparent with the student. Here are the competencies you have to demonstrate this term. And here are the assessments that we're going to give you to demonstrate that. And here are a bunch of materials. Many people on many topics have what we call Swiss cheese knowledge. They may have a lot of knowledge, but there's holes, right? Holes in their knowledge. And what we're trying to do is give folks materials to fill in those holes. But you're the only one who can really know where those holes are. So often people take an assessment and they realize, gosh, I have way more holes in my knowledge than I might have imagined, right? And then they say, okay, I need to learn this, and this. And there's a bunch of content that's been disaggregated, so bundled into smaller units so that folks can take and learn that and become aware sometimes of the limits of their knowledge, dig in deeper where they need to, and then go back and demonstrate their competency in the assessment at that point. And in a truly competency model that is not time-based, those assessments are done at will throughout the quarter or the try or whatever you have going on. And then the person can be done. And the other thing about a competency model is, and this is very hard for some people, is that you can repeat the assessment until you demonstrate competency. Because the key is to get you to competency, to give you a chance to demonstrate what you do know, not to catch you at what you don't know.
So that almost sounds like that pass-fail versus grade point type of.
I think that's right. I think that's a way. I mean, the idea with competency is that, and this is a big debate that in the weeds in the competency-based field, but is many people believe that you're either competent or you're not. So that's a pass-fail model, right? Mm-hmm. Some people believe, well, but you can be like really outstandingly good at something as well as being competent at it. Many people are also disturbed by the word competent because they think it sounds weak, like you're adequate. Do you want an adequate doctor? No, I want an excellent doctor, right? And that's not what's meant by it. But I know languaging has all this meaning that we all carry with it, of course. So, but you're right. It can be done in a pass-fail way. Mm-hmm.
And you also co-authored a book, and it's entitled A Leader's Guide to Competency-Based Education from Inception to Implementation. Tell us about the purpose of this particular book.
Right. So the purpose of the book was really to give a big picture overview for people who were in an administrative role of some kind, whether it's chair to president, to understand the answers to the kinds of questions you're asking in a fairly simplified way, but with enough depth so that people understood the work that's involved in this transformation of curriculum, right? Because this was a hot topic for a while, competency-based education, and the worry was that we would get low-quality programs out there that then would harm the sort of concept or the idea or the reputation of competency-based education. So we really wanted administrators and others who thought, let's do that, to understand what you're signing up for, right? To be enthused about it, understand the evidence that supports it, but also to understand the commitment that it takes to really transform curriculum in the way that really allows competency-based education to move forward. Now, in our country, in the US, the CCE, the accrediting body, does use competency language, right? And so we could imagine that we could transform curricula in the chiropractic programs to become truly competency-based curriculum. As I said earlier, our efforts would still be tied to hours due to the licensing boards in every state's requirements for hours. So there's a both and there, but sometimes you just don't get the kind of power of the competency model that you would if you could be freed from that hours requirement.
This seems like a very, like you said, divisive type of a subject, and within itself divisive.
Yeah.
And that being said, if you were to imagine just where we are today, looking ahead, how the chiropractic education landscape may be developing in the coming years, how would you envision that?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's a great question. Of course, um, everybody's going to have their opinion about that one, right? But I, and you can't answer that question without referencing the past year, the pandemic, right? Because I think what happened during the last year, as people pivoted to remote education, it was not distance education because it, for the most part, wasn't compliant with the requirements of distance education. It was truly remote education. It allowed, I think, all of the schools to understand a different world is out there, right? Many chiropractic education programs were really still rooted in I'm just going to say, like in an industrial age model, hours based, input based, not outcomes based, based on sort of what people often refer to as sage on the stage. I lecture. I mean, you listen. That hours-based model, and the lecture model is based on this sort of concept that if the longer you're exposed to my wisdom, the better you're going to be educated. Content, the ownership and exposure to content has this, I used to teach the history of science, so I love tracking things like that back. So, way back in the Dark Ages, the only people who could read were in the churches, right? In the European history. Women were not allowed to have exposure to knowledge. Certain communities, people of color in our own country, were not allowed to have exposure. So the right to have exposure to knowledge is a very powerful theme of equity and inequities across most histories in the world. And what we have right now with the internet is commoditized content. Now, you have to be smart to be able to curate it for yourself. But right now, the idea about how do you get information and what's the use of a faculty-student interaction? So what's the power of that interaction? And I think that's about helping people think like a chiropractor, helping them touch like a chiropractor, helping them do the hands-on stuff much more than it's about lecturing about anatomy and physiology, right? So
Right.
what I think is that chiropractic education has to pivot to leverage the power, the highest level interaction power and value that we can get from the human interaction, and curate content that allows people to do a lot of that learning that was done in person, leverage it from other sources, right? Because you can get good information lots of places. What you can't get is good human interaction lots of places. You can't get good modeling of what it means to be an outstanding chiropractor lots of places. That's the essence of what the faculty bring to the table. And I'd love to see us be able to leverage that in a more strong interpersonal way rather than standing in front of a large room and lecturing.
Looking at somebody's demeanor, looking at their facial expressions, looking at their nonverbal communications. So really, a lot of communication is based on the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've done that for so long. And so that is an argument against wholly online, right? I mean, you can do some of it here, but it's not the same and totally as being in person. So what we got to do is take this valuable time. I think that's one of the lessons from the pandemic. The valuable time that we have physically by each other and use it well.
I guess if we were to think about it in two words, it would be quality versus quantity.
There you go. You got it. You distilled all that down.
You have demonstrated a pattern of leadership that has been reported to include listening, understanding, being inclusive, but yet also being decisive or having decisiveness. How do you balance all of these aspects within leadership?
I mean, I think that's the only way you can be a genuine leader. Long ago, so I am a psychologist. I was a therapist for a long time, and I learned that one of my downfalls is I'm very bad at being what you're supposed to be, like a blank screen. You know, you're not supposed to show reaction. So long ago, I learned that that's not what I'm good at. So I might as well go with it. I'm very transparent, right? And it turns out in administration, most of the time people appreciate that as long as it's respectful, which I believe I am at my core. So for the most part, that works. So I believe in a model called servant leadership, which means that I'm really here to support the mission of the community and of the institution, not here to sort of glorify my position or myself in any way. And so if you really take a servant leader sort of model, that is the only way you can do it. You have to understand what the community wants, needs, synthesize all that, and move forward. You do have to decide at some point, and that does not always make everybody happy, because one of the tricks is people can't always see that their input influenced the decision. And that's one of the things I continuously struggle with, is helping people see, well, if you hadn't told me this over here, the decision would have been slightly different. It is not exactly what you told me to do, but what you told me to do influenced where we landed, right? And that's a hard thing for people. But yeah, no, you have to decide, or else you would just sort of wallow around.
That seems unique in your approach, having a background of a PhD in psychology, being able to see some of the things you saw and turn it into something different later on.
I want to be clear, it's not like I'm categorizing, diagnosing people, that sort of thing. It's much more that it allows me to listen. One of my favorite psychologists is Alfred Adler, and the reason he's one of my favorites is that he talks about being pulled toward purpose. So he was a contemporary of Freud, who of course talked about us being driven from our past. And Adler was like, no, we're pulled toward purpose. And so that for me is also an important sort of, mindset.
Which explains your passion about healthcare and also higher education.
Yeah, in part it does. It does.
I guess if we were to distill what you just said, once again, you have an insider's perspective.
Oh, I like that. I never thought of it that way. That's good. You're very good with this summarizing. That's awesome.
Well, turning to the WFC's Be Epic campaign, what that is evidence-based, people-centered, interprofessional, and collaborative. And so you have mentioned quite a few things through this conversation. You've really referenced evidence-based quite a bit. We have talked about the human perspective being more of a people-centered type of approach to this. You work with interprofessional institution, and obviously that comes from a collaborative perspective. Tell us your thoughts on the Be Epic campaign and how it aligns with NWHSU's ethos.
There's this question in the history of science that talks about is it great people or great ideas that drives science forward? So like, is it just an idea whose time has come? And so then many people it's a zeitgeist moment. Many people are bubbling up this idea. And I think there's something in the zeitgeist about this epic concept, because you hear variations on it at the VA, right? At our institution. So what we've done is we've created a position that is the Director of Integrative Care. And so in doing that, we had to define, what do we mean by integrative care? It's very similar to the Be Epic. It's patient at the center. So you've got person-centered. Every profession operating to the top of their scope of practice. So you've got this collaborative position, right? And it's at the top of their practice being evidence-based, right? So always being evidence-based. So you've got that piece as well. And then the interprofessional piece is there as well. So when we talk about integrative care, patient at the center, a group of professionals, integrative kind of professionals operating around that person with the person's needs at the center of their mind as they apply top of their scope of practice in an evidence-based manner. So that's our vision for integrative care, but it sounds very much like the EPIC campaign to me.
Right. Many parallels. And what I really love about all of this is that there's such a focus on people centered, having the person at the center, which should be the purpose of anyone in healthcare, because the person that they are serving, as you have referenced, the person that their purpose comes from is their patient or the person that they are treating.
At least it should be.
There's a lot of energy driving towards that direction. So it's good to hear.
Yeah.
So let's jump to you. Tell us something unique about you.
I don't know how unique it is, but I decided to use the question as an opportunity to talk about, you've mentioned a couple of times that I seem passionate about healthcare. And what I would say I'm passionate about is bringing quality healthcare to everyone. And so one of those things that I've been involved with for more than 25 years now, gosh, probably almost 30 years anyway, is an organization called Mano a Mano USA. There's a Mano a Mano Bolivia also. So Mano a Mano means hand to hand in Spanish. And I was a founding board member of this organization, still very, very active. But it started by shipping supplies, medical supplies in the US that we were throwing out because they were outdated. And we were just putting them in the landfill. We gathered them up and started shipping them to a hospital in Bolivia, a good connection in Bolivia. And now we've built over 150 healthcare clinics in rural Bolivia. We've built landing strips, roads, reservoirs, so that people can, in this sort of mindset of the whole person, they can grow healthy food. They can. We built sort of laboratory space so they can use different water for drinking than they use for their cleaning. So we've done water work, we've done work with education, built schools, and Bolivia had the highest maternal death rate in this hemisphere, really. And now it's really reduced with those clinics. So it's a partnership with the Bolivian government, preventive health work. And so that's one of the things that, I don't know if it's so much about me, but it's one of my passions outside of the workspace.
So it sounds like the term that has been coined, social determinants of health, sounds like you are very much harnessing all of that to promote general health and welfare of the community.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So it's done a lot of great work. Lots of donors. I'm still deeply involved, but I'm not on the board anymore or anything, but still one of my passions. Yeah. I don't know how interesting that is, but there you go.
Very interesting. I could see why you'd be passionate about it. So, and then the outcomes that you see, the decrease for infant mortality. So, well, let's jump to the students now. So as you are president of Northwestern, do you have any advice for students who are interested in the path of pursuing academic administration?
I guess what I would say is it's super important to teach. Many people end up in administration without coming through the teaching path nowadays. It didn't used to be the case. It used to always be sort of the teaching path. But I think there's something about understanding what it means to be in the classroom, whatever form that takes, whether it's a virtual classroom, a face-to-face classroom, a hybrid classroom, a high-flex classroom, whatever they are now. Understanding the pressures of educating, supporting people along their educational path. I think there's something to that gives you depth to your ability to lead an institution of higher ed. So that would be my core advice. Get some experience on the ground, because I do think it's hard for any of us to follow someone who we feel doesn't really get what we're doing. And so this allows you at least exposure to have a chance to get it a little bit. So that
makes sense. Yeah. Only knowing what is part of the institution. If you haven't ever experienced, how could you, lead it without having some of that experience? So
yeah, we can't do everything, but at least try to teach, because it's harder than it looks.
I'd imagine. Well, Dr. Bushway, I want to thank you for showing us some of your life, telling us a little bit about your passion, your human perspective today. I really feel privileged to have heard your perspective today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.